Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the #1 resource for actors and talent seekers. I am your host, Jack Smart, awards editor at Backstage, and I'm here to guide you through every aspect of the entertainment industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. These intimate, inspirational conversations with today's most award-worthy film, television, and theater artists provide you, dear listener, advice on how to live the creative life, personal stories of success and failure alike, and maybe, just maybe, a tantalizing glimpse in the envelope.
There's so many different variables for the reason you got no. It's not because you're a bad actor or you're a bad person or you aren't very good or you'll never get a job. It's just no for the moment.
Here we are, listeners. Welcome to another episode of In the Envelope. Here at Backstage, I am here in my cramped little closet, and it's warm. It's warm in here. So, on today's episode of the podcast, the voice you just heard is that of Sarah Snook, who you likely know from a little show called Succession, one of my favorite TV shows, which aired its second season sometime last year, and is once again Emmy eligible after winning a writing Emmy last year. Brian Cox, who's an actor on the show, won a Golden Globe. It has continued to pick up awards. I do think it's a serious contender for the drama categories at the Emmys this year, and I'm just so excited for the Emmys. Emmys Phase 1 is basically underway. Networks are advertising. Talent is promoting their projects. It's the most wonderful time of the year. But joining us today is Sarah, who joined us from her native Australia. Technological feat. Not long after the crisis kept everyone indoors. So it was really good to take her temperature and to kind of hear what she's been going through. And obviously just to ask her about her training, her craft, her outlook on life and on acting and auditions in particular. She has some great stuff about how to handle rejection. There's quite a bit about self-tapes, including a very funny story towards the end of our interview about just how disastrously a self-taped audition can go. And I think in today's episode description, we're actually going to link to, I'm just looking at our site, we just have a ton of content on self-tapes. But also looking at our site, I mean, if you are stuck at home and you're looking to still audition or you're looking to put together a reel, you're wondering how to do it, we have articles from experts, we have interviews with industry leaders. This one says, Enacting coaches 13 tips for better self-tapes. Avoid this one major mistake when filming your self-tapes at home. The Content Creator's Guide to Casting Remotely. Oh, this is good. What do you use as the background for your self-tapes? Backstage.com has all of the nitty-gritty advice you need in this crisis and in general. Self-tapes are a very important part of the industry for any actor, any performer. Also, as always, we're going to be linking to The Slate, which is our virtual and community-driven content opportunities. Those are really up and running. We have great engagement over Zoom, webinars, and YouTube, and Instagram. If you're not following Backstage on Instagram, you can find Backstage at BackstageCast. Continue to stay tuned for our podcast episodes that are coming out now twice a week because it is Emmy season. And then last thing I will say before we get to this fabulous interview with Sarah is that this podcast is 3 years old. It is the birthday of In the Envelope, and I would just like to give a special shout out to Kasey Howe, who birthed this podcast and said, what if we did a thing that was this? And then that thing came to be. So thank you to the team at Backstage that puts this thing together. Thank you to Jamie Muffett for helping make this thing happen every single episode. And here's to 3 years, and here's to 3 more years. Oh my gosh. All right, let's get me out of this hot closet and get to this amazing interview after a quick break. This podcast is brought to you by Backstage, the world's #1 casting platform. Listen, a lot of the guests on In the Envelope, an awards podcast, used Backstage at the beginning of their careers. It's how they are now in the running for Emmy, for Oscar, for Tony, etc. If you are at the beginning of your career as an artist, here's what you do. You go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code envelope at checkout for a free 30-day trial. That's right, free 30-day trial if you go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code envelope. All you got to do then is make a profile, upload a headshot, and start applying to jobs, to the thousands of casting notices that are uploaded every day, which you can filter online to match your specific talents, your specific needs, your specific looks. Get that dream started today. Check out that free 30-day trial, backstage.com/subscribe, enter the code envelope. Let's do it. Sarah Snook is best known to American audiences as the fabulously ruthless Shiv Roy on HBO's Emmy-winning drama Succession. She's worked in theater, TV, and film in the US and her native Australia, including in Sisters of War, Predestination, The Dressmaker, and Jezebel, winning 2 Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts Awards. Here's our interview with the wonderful Sarah Snook. Sarah, we're so thrilled to talk to you, and I have so much to ask you about because, as we said, these are strange times. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. You know, it fluctuates. It's like I'm good, and then I'm in complete despair, and then I'm good. I saw a meme about knowing what it's like to live in a Jane Austen novel for real now. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's like, you know, thinking about a cough could mean death, imminent death, doing crafts with the 3 people you can hang out with till summer that you're going to see until summer. And just a lot of like slowing down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny you say the thing about despair. Like, it's not good to hear that you're experiencing despair, but in a way, it's actually kind of comforting. Like, to me, it's comforting for me to hear from others, having a tough time.
Absolutely. Like, I took a photo of myself. I showed a couple of friends this. I took a photo of myself the other day because I was like, I can't make my face move. It's stuck in like a not even a frown. It's like the skin on the flesh on my skull is slipping off. I can't actually smile right now. I took a photo and I was like, just remember this because this is not forever. This is just, you know, what your face is doing right now. But like found myself catatonic staring at a wall for 15 minutes. And then there's something, you got to go like, this is not, you got to get out, go for a walk, do something. Ended up having a solo dance party that night to a friend of mine's DJ Doomsday Disco thing.
Solo dance party is a great idea. Yeah. That's excellent advice. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's so funny because we're Backstage. This is Backstage's podcast. We're all about asking actors and artists for advice. I've just never had to ask about advice for like how to deal with being essentially in captivity and like keeping your spirits up.
It's wild. I mean, but do you know what? Actually, I was thinking about this, and my friends and I have been talking about it, about how strangely we are, you know, in people in the creative arts industries that have, fluctuating jobs. You're employed for 6 weeks, and then you're not for 12 weeks, and then you're employed for, you know, a day, and then not. That we actually we're quite good at being and keeping ourselves busy or being used to volatility, I guess, where like you don't know when that job is going through, and right now none of the rest of the world knows. It's kind of comforting to go like, we're all in this together, and you know what, we've been training all our careers for this.
Right. It's actually kind of empowering in a way for early career actors to hear that, like, you're equipped to deal with this period.
Absolutely, yeah, and equipped in the way, like, oh God, but, you know, mind you, I can't imagine coming out of something like, so I went to drama school for like 3 years, and I can't imagine coming out of that and going like, right, okay, world, I'm ready to,
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, you're just not ready for me yet. That's what it is. You need yeah. Yeah, I just need to hibernate a little more, just to gestate a little more, and then I'll rebirth something.
Gestate, yeah. I mean, have you been doing actorly things, like, other than just basic self-care, which I think is important? Like how else? And the dance parties. Are you doing anything to kind of keep you focused as an actor or as a performer?
I find it really hard to do that, particularly being by myself. So I came back to Australia. I'm from Australia, and I was here visiting friends and family in early February. And I got stuck in Papua New Guinea, and so visiting family up there, and flew back just after Australia enforced the mandatory 14-day quarantine. So I was like in complete isolation by myself inside, couldn't go outside at all. And I know that people are doing that now, and that's not a unique experience, but sort of confronting when you first do that, having come from, seeing lots of people and family and friends and having quite a social, active social life. And so I found it really hard to get my head around the fact that I've got all this time, and isn't that wonderful? And yet I was doing absolutely nothing of what I could see of value in terms of my career or acting or being an artist or creativity or anything like that. And I found I hit a real low at one point going, what even is the point? Like, for an actor to be by themselves doing nothing, and you are doing nothing. Like, you could be, the value of you as an actor is to communicate. And what are you doing? You're sitting by yourself in a room, not communicating. You've got no sort of access to the outside world. And I found that dichotomy really problematic until I realized that the thing that I'd been doing, because people had said, what are you filling your days with? Because it was, I think I was the first in a group of friends of mine to really hit the quarantine, like isolation, straight up. And like, what are you filling your days with? You're watching just heaps of TV? I was like, no, I haven't really watched TV, and I'm not even reading books. I did a bit of ukulele.
Good.
Doing a bit of a puzzle. I really don't. I get to the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know what I did with the day. And then I realized that I'd been calling everybody, like all my friends, like having really long conversations with people I haven't spoken to for a while, and just kind of like airing our grievances and talking about where we're at in sort of life and our feelings with living through a pandemic. I was like, okay, well, maybe that's my worth. Like if you're an actor and you're meant to communicate, talking to people on the regular is what to do. It doesn't feel like it's adding to your career, but then not everything has to, right?
Yeah, it's good to hear that. It's good to hear how you're dealing with it, including the struggles. I mean, on this podcast, we like to hear about the failures as much as the successes, and the low points as well as the highs. I'd love to hear I'd love to go back from the beginning and first of all just ask, like, why acting, and since when were you bit by the acting bug?
I don't know if there was like a singular bite, like a real munch.
Okay.
But both my sisters used to do acting as I was growing up, and I do remember sort of like quite young seeing my eldest sister do Peter Pan, just like a community theatre performance of that, and she was playing Peter Pan. And I remember I went it was my birthday. It was my 3 or 4 friends of mine went for my birthday as part of my birthday party, and I remember seeing her on stage, and at the point where Peter Pan's meant to fly, they tipped a bed up on its side, and then she just lay down sort of across it, like planking basically, and pretended to fly like that. And when that happened, I was like, oh my God, I did not know my sister could fly. And this sort of understanding what reality was, and like, that's a bed and they can do that, and then you could pretend to fly, but then also at the same time going like, I can't believe she just knew how to do that, and obviously she can fly. That's it. That's that's just like cool. The understanding of like the magic of theater, I guess, and the blurred lines of reality.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I just did it through primary school and high school. Always that drama kid. Performing, but never like, and I think kids do this, right? You sort of you tend to gravitate towards or develop the skills in which you get approval or affirmation for.
Oh,
and
sure.
So people were saying, that's great, you did a great job, and so I would keep doing that. I've been thinking about this lately as an adult, that like what we miss with that is that like, if you get a lot of enjoyment out of it, but you're not the best, kids tend to just stop or not bother because why am I going to do something if I'm not going to be the best at it or not going to get continual kind of validation or affirmation for it, which is like probably speaks to a lot of what we are as humans. But isn't that sad that like you get to adulthood and maybe have lost a skill or an engagement with something that really gave you pleasure or joy when you were younger, but and now you're sort of starting, from a point where you could have been further ahead with that if you'd pursued it,
right?
Even just for your own enjoyment, even if you weren't going to be amazing at it, but it gave you joy.
Right. And it's likelier you'll be good at it if you do stick with it. And very few people are amazing right off the bat.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so. And I think as kids we're looking for the things that for the yeses. We're very good at like theremins for the yes. And so you do a marathon because it's compulsory in high school. And you come like second to last, which is me. And you're like, well, I can't run. I'm just not a runner. It's like, that's not true. Like, maybe you didn't sleep very well that week. And maybe you're just like going through a massive growth spurt. You've run that distance now and you're fine. Like, like wiping it off the table and saying you can't do something just because you didn't top the ladder or what have you.
Totally.
It's silly.
I love that theremin for yes. It's very poetic. And so then it was but did your parents do it or was it just you and your sisters who were into it?
Yeah, neither my mum or dad did it, but my grandmother, who passed away when my mum was actually quite young, so I never met her. She she and her sister studied at the Guildhall Music and Drama in London in the 20s.
Very cool.
And graduated like late 20s and then did sort of rep theatre in the early 30s in London. And then she went on this kind of, great adventure. Like I read some of her diaries and journals now and I'm like, whoa, that's wild. You went you were 25 or 6 and you took a boat, I guess, to South Africa and you arrived in Cape Town and then you drove by yourself from Cape Town to Johannesburg to take up a position as a boarding house sort of elocution mistress just to get some experience and need a job situation. I feel like it's kind of like extraordinary as like a 25-year-old in the early 30s. But then in mid-30s and then war broke out, the Second World War, and so she couldn't get back to her home. So she kind of stayed there for a year and then like emigrated on to New Zealand and ended up becoming like a director and a producer there and sort of always having it involved with her life, but didn't kind of continue pursuing acting in that sense. But so she was she's the heritage.
Yeah, it's an inheritance. Yeah. That's amazing. I'd love to hear about your training and kind of where you trained and what you learned and whether, I hate to ask about like an artistic process or is there one technique you subscribe to or do you have a style of acting?
Oh, style of acting. I don't know. I hope. Actually, the one thing I did learn. Okay, so I trained at NIDA, which is the National Institute in Sydney, and I think as an overall thing, the one thing I did learn was their method of teaching. I guess was giving you a smorgasbord, like the buffet of choose what you want, and an amalgamation of all of these things will be the best thing for you in whatever way you see fit. And that I think is the best in that, like, for me, what works is like a certain style of acting or method or process works for, an action film, but doesn't actually work for Pinter. That's going to be, those are two very different approaches. There's a central sort of essential kind of truth, obviously, and something that, you're always looking for the key or where the crack is in a character to kind of get in. But I feel like in terms of approaches, they vary by project for me, at least.
Gotcha. Yeah, it depends on the material, but the commonality is, I love that key to a character, and your job is to what? Just
there's that.
Maybe unlock the character.
Totally. Yeah, there's like what's that quote? It's kind of don't worry about the cracks because that's where the light gets in. I think that's that I feel. Ooh.
Cool.
I feel like that's a good one for characters, right? Because you want to see those cracks, and you want to see, and maybe it's like the crack over here or the key over here that like explodes, and just like to drop it in, like to find where you as a person and a character meet that imagined creation.
Yeah, I imagine you must think a lot about, again, character by character, but do you think a lot about, well, where do I overlap with this person, and how can I use that? Yeah, absolutely.
And I find, strangely, whether it's like a chicken or the egg situation, because I do find that like characters that I've played or that I have had real response from in terms of playing them have been ones that I've had to learn something from. I played a character called Sal in something called The Secret River, and did not feel like her at all. Was a bit like, why did, like I could sort of maybe see why I got cast, but I was like, God, I wish I could have her confidence. But having, faked it till you make it kind of a bit while playing her for 6 weeks, I was like, okay, I could take a little Sal with me. Great, I'm just going to take a little of her. Cool. I'll leave all this stuff, but I'll take this part of her. And, like you get, it's a strange thing where you get like a practice run at life in some ways of like, what does it feel like to do this? And you get to like experiment and then go like, okay, well, that was just a mask you were putting on for a bit, but now you've learnt the lessons from it. And maybe you can take that into your own life. I guess that's what we do when we're like listening to stories as well. Like you're kind of putting like they're characters like avatars. Like you're putting yourself into those people's shoes, watching things happen and like learning from them.
Yeah, like taking another set of circumstances for that test drive, and then I suppose applying it to your life, but also applying it to your next job or next character. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, the worst thing, or the best thing, who knows, is when you get older. And I feel like I don't know, my career seemed to like, quote unquote, like take off a little more when I started playing like mums when I was, 25. Oh. Part of me was a bit like, this industry, man, excuse my language, but like, I shouldn't be, I'm 25, I'm playing a mother to a 13-year-old girl. That's ridiculous.
Oh boy. Yeah.
But for some reason I kind of understood why, and that like I was never really, my headshot may have looked like the ingenue, but like that was never the character I was going to play. And so playing those kind of more, I don't know, not stable, but like mature, I guess, roles made sense to me. But then I don't have kids now, but I'm certainly older than some of the characters that I played, or like approaching the age that the characters were. And now I'm like, oh my God, I should have done this and I should have done that. And like, what was I thinking playing a character like this? Like, no. Like when I do finally have children, I'll be like, wow, you were playing like 30% of what it is to be a mom. Like you had no idea, mate.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Like how often do you look back at a role and go, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that?
Yeah, I avoid that by just not looking back.
Yeah.
I'll think about it and be like, all right, moving on. Good lesson to learn, but let's not watch it.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that said about auditions, where of course auditions is the opportunity for, when you leave that audition room, that is fully the opportunity to constantly replay it in your head and wish you had done it differently. Ben, what is your relationship with auditions?
Auditioning really got me down for a long time, and it was something that my mum said, and I've said this in other things before, but like my mum really, and she's not part of the industry, and she had this really sage thing to have said, and she said that auditioning, if it's getting you down so much, why don't you think of that as the work? Like it's not the gate to get the work, it's the actual it's like the field already, like you're playing on the field. That's the audition is the work, and when you get the work and you get paid for the work, that's kind of like back pay for all the work you did in the auditioning to get to that point for every other job you ever did. And I liked that in just like a little shift of thinking, I guess, because I hated auditioning for a really long time.
Sure.
And also like self-taping started coming up, was more prevalent like maybe a year after I graduated. And I remember doing my first self-tape a year after I graduated and was like, this sucks. This absolutely blows. Now I have to be conscious of myself. Now I have to look at myself on tape and see all my flaws and mistakes and, oh, you're the worst actor ever, Sarah. And do all that sort of like confront yourself. Yeah. But I think that's a good thing in the end. It's like, okay, well, it's not as if no one else can see that when you're performing. That's kind of the point. Like, you're afraid of revealing yourself like you're meant to as an actor.
You got to show those cracks.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I'd never thought of the self-tape as being like, the self-tape does put you, the actor, a little bit in the casting director's chair, a little bit. Sort of thinking about casting yourself or something. Yeah, which is great. And I know that after a while, a lot of people I only self-tape because I get complete control. And I'm like, if you can get over your nerves to go into an audition room, maybe it's better. Because there's something about like the challenge and the risk of that, which now self-tapes have become this kind of lovely little safety net of going, well, I just do it and I send it off and I never hear and it's as if it never happened. Whereas like the audition where you have to go into the room, you have to meet the person, you have to show up. Like you have to be a fully formed human being, not just like a mid-shot, you know? Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. Like do you ever give the do you distinguish between stage acting and screen acting? Are they very much the same approach? Because I feel like that's a distinguishing between auditioning in person and auditioning over self-tape.
Not by like necessity or like by medium, I guess. In that like I don't. I think that like the key is just like listening all the time, and being present. And so if that alters through stage or screen, I don't know. Like I like the process of learning about the other person in the moment more than the performance. And that, because like if you just listen, like this is why working with like Matthew McFadden, for instance, like I get to work with him so often, it's so great, is because like you don't have to do anything, you just have to like watch him and listen to him. And when you're, I guess, in a stage performance, stage audition, maybe that's easier because you're less conscious of the people who are around watching. Well, but that's true for screen as well, because like there's only a camera. I don't know. It's about the same for me.
It's just about
I'm thinking about this now.
Yeah, it's the co-star, like you said earlier. Like it's about communication. It's not about a solo performance. Yeah, and that can be hard sometimes if you've got a terrible reader. Like if you're not comfortable with that person. Like, or you're doing like, oh God, you're doing, you know, the only person who could get to read was like your mum, and you're doing a kind of a seduction scene. You're like, oh God, this is just not going to work. You know, like I can't even do this. I'd rather record myself and act off my voice, you know, like, do it one for one. But you know, like, I hadn't thought of that. If your reader's your mom. Well, you mentioned Matthew.
That, but what if?
A seduction scene with your,
oh, Christ.
I mean, that's an acting challenge for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, I want to get to Shiv. I want to get to like working with people like Matthew, because we at Backstage are such fans of Succession, and you're so amazing on that show. But I want to ask you first about, so you mostly worked in Australia for a long time, and then kind of gradually started to make your way over to TV and film here. And I'm wondering if you have advice for people who want to do that same thing and kind of break into Hollywood as you have.
Yeah, I mean, I took the approach of I wanted to work steadily in both countries as much as possible, because I am Australian and I believe in the Australian industry. But, you know, in terms of the American industry and what that offers, it's kind of a global industry. It's you know, if that's what happens with globalization, you find like different countries have different major industries, and America is a center for acting in TV and film and theater, but majority TV and film in a global sense. And for me, I was reticent to do the make them move. Coming from Australia, what we tend to do is like, you do a little bit of work in Australia and then like you go to LA and see if you can make it. And that's kind of what everyone else in America is doing, right? They're like graduating from high school, getting labeled as the drama kid or the prettiest girl, and going straight to LA and trying to make a career. And for me, it was more important to like find what my own self-worth was to offer, so that if it was a no, and it was likely to be a no on a number of occasions, that I didn't feel like a no was the end, was like a final sort of nail in any coffin, that it wasn't. And this is just for me, right? There's like, wonderful actors and friends of mine who've gone to LA and like stuck it out for many years and are making moves and finding those rewards come back to them for the time and effort put in. But for me, it was about maintaining a life in Australia that I could be proud of, and a career in Australia that I could be proud of, so that when I was told the no, it was like, yeah, don't want me, can't have me. I'm actually working in in Australia right now.
Gotcha. Yeah.
To kind of give yourself the backup to make sure you're being satisfied and fulfilled without, because so often in acting you don't have control. So where can you find those avenues of control, and be okay with the flux, because you have that little sort of that avenue. So for a while I said, a lot of people, when I would see them at parties or things like that, or like, friends of mine out for coffee, like, oh, so how long have you been living in LA now? I'm like, I have never lived in LA, but I just don't tell anyone where I do live, or just announce that I'm going to go and live somewhere. And in the same in LA, I was just like, yeah, I live here, of course. Or it doesn't, we're so global anyway, and it doesn't matter. You can send a self-tape in or take a flight but that was what worked for me. I mean, some people maybe need the all-in feet first risk to really charge them up.
Right. It is a risk management decision, I suppose.
Totally. Opportunity cost and all those kinds of like economic things. Yeah.
And it's safe to say you want to live your life first and foremost, and the career is part of that, but not necessarily the biggest part of that.
Totally, because I feel like they're hand in hand, right? Like if you're a person who's never traveled outside of your hometown and are expected to play a character who grew up in like Alaska in some oil field in the top of the like your imagination can only take you so far. You got to like live a life, have experiences, go traveling, meet people, fail in other areas, so that you can like bring it back to your work, right?
Which just makes me think again of this moment in history and how we have to seek inspiration in other ways right now, and it's frustrating.
Totally. But like, what great, and okay, so there's two things that I think about this. Like, one, what great work, art, creativity, stories, what have you, will come out of this. But then on the other side of that, like, there's no timeline on that. that's the thing of spending 2 weeks by yourself and going like, am I an artist? I can't even art. Like, that's 2 weeks, man. Come on. Like Thoreau went into the woods for 2 years and wrote a book. Like wow. You learn that days are really long. Like people have many hours to like lie on beds and think. Don't hold yourself to the same like contemporary standards of like do, got to achieve now.
Yeah. And you have to be perfect. Gosh, I had not thought of Thoreau. Whoa. Thoreau is a great example of this
it's like,
moment in time.
What's that thing where he's like, I've traveled far in the woods of Concord? Like that was his thing, where he was like, I know every leaf and tree, and that's his, his travel and his imagination, and that's amazing. And he wrote like one book out of that. Well, but like that's really simplifying and bringing it down to being present, I guess. And allowing yourself to slow down.
Being present, yeah. He was living in the moment with his leaves and his trees, and those were his scene partners.
Yes, and how valuable.
Totally.
Mother Nature's got a lot to say, I guess. She certainly does right now.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, okay, Shiv. I have to ask about Shiv, of course. It's so cool to hear your voice, but not Shiv's accent, which I find so fascinating. First of all, do you have tips on accent work? I don't know if you've been asked this before, but because we're the Actorly podcast, we have to ask, where do you train and how do you master such a flawless accent?
With accents, I guess I have like a natural ear for them. But I also have a natural fear of not getting them right, as a sort of a good balance. And so I've always like, where people have been like, oh, that's perfectly fine. I'm like, yeah, but is it fine's not perfect. You know, like, it's like
gotcha.
not fine perfectly. Perfectly fine is not good. So I always have like gone with like a voice coach or a dialect coach for a project that's like a new accent. And I for Succession used Jerome Butler. It's a wonderful dialect coach in New York. And he really kind of gave me, again, it's like these little keys of like, oh, you have the habit, Sarah, of putting your tongue in this position for the R, but actually, if you did this, it would be like a much easier situation. Like you could drop into it faster. I'm like, oh, and then, you know, then it works finally, which is great.
Gotcha.
But I was always one of those people who didn't like to remain in accent when I was not acting. So like if I had a scene with Shiv and then I wouldn't like to then meet somebody and not be speaking in my natural Australian accent. But I've kind of gotten over that for the speed at which we have to work in TV. So I tend to like stay in it a bit as much as I can. But then the good thing is like take the pressure off to like go, okay, that vowel was wrong, but the person understood you anyway. It's okay, just keep moving.
Gotcha.
And what has helped me with that is like being able to deal with the failure in the present moment, and so that when you're acting and you're worried about failing, when it's like actually when it's worth something, when it's like on camera, you actually have a better skill to manage that, I guess, more sort of broadly. Yeah.
How often do you think about failure? I guess in your acting or in character, or
no? I mean, she doesn't. That's what's so great about Shiv.
Well, Shiv doesn't. Like, no.
Isn't that wild? She's like, she doesn't even. I mean, she does. She certainly, yeah, she definitely does. But it's not in a way that most people think about failure, because her failure is not living up to expectations. And yes, a lot of us have that, but it's not with the other added problem of not being able to eat because you can't afford your rent, or you can't afford to, you know, like those kinds of like survival things. Like her failure is existential. Predominantly, and well, all of us have existential fears of failure. But
yeah, no, that's fascinating, because I did want to ask too, like that you're on a show where you're portraying somebody in the 0.1%, 0.001%, and I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're not you yourself in that 0.001%.
Oh God, no. I almost like didn't want to audition because I was like, I don't know what it is to be a billionaire. That's like even my imagination can't get me there.
Right. Like, and you, everyone on that show is just so preternaturally confident. Like, is there just a key or a secret to playing ultra confident just by nature of being ultra rich?
Yeah, it's something about entitlement, and not ever really, well, this is not true because there's many sort of facets to it, but the belief that you have the right to be in any room because you have X amount of zeros in your bank account. Yeah. And that I feel like is a real kind of fundamental thing, because that doesn't mean that person doesn't feel sort of like necessarily like, you know, ego side of things or that kind of thing of going, well, I don't feel like I'm fit enough to be in this room, or I don't think I'm smart enough to be in this room. That can definitely exist. But there's something that solves that by going, yeah, but I could buy friends who think I am, or I could go to places very easily that, you know, where I would fit in. There's like, it's not final or something. There's like, entitlement's an interesting thing, I think. It's very multifaceted. But that's where I started with Shiv.
Right. Like if that's not something you related to, I mean, do you remember your first impressions of her?
Oh, yeah. Annoying. I was like, I don't know. I kind of was like, I don't know how to play this character. And other than just sort of like having this unflappable self-belief in a way, which actors don't naturally tend to have. Interesting, yes. But, and you know what? There was a scene in the pilot that actually got cut that for me was like the key. I was like, oh, this is her. This is where she exposes vulnerability. This is where her Achilles heel is. This is like, okay, this is the real version of her. There's something in here that's like the crack. And that scene got cut. from the whole
Whoa.
season, and then put into the second season in episode 8 when we're in Dundee at the V&A.
No way.
Is when she's giving him the book of all the places that they've lived, and
Yes.
all the houses that they own, and that he doesn't really think much of the gift. He doesn't kind of get the point of that. And I think that's a real the way that it was structured beforehand was much more cold from him and much more earnest from her, and that ended up not being quite right from the characters. But there's a version of that in the second season, which I love in that still exists for those characters.
Yeah.
It just didn't get a time to express it until the second season. But I felt like that was my way in for me as a person to relate to her as a character.
That is so fascinating that it was late in season 2. It was the scene that kind of clued you in. I mean, I always like asking, especially for TV, how characters change. You're often told things about your character that you didn't know at the beginning. And I wanted to ask how Shiv has changed for you and your impressions of her have changed. And it sounds like if you're revisiting that audition scene later in season 2, then like it must have been a completely different context, I guess.
Totally. Yeah, yes. But there was like foundational kind of building blocks that remain. Like her weak point is her dad and her vulnerability and fear of vulnerability around him, which we see, I think, in the opening of season 2. That's why she's so reticent, I guess, to believe that he would actually offer her a position in the company, let alone like top position, because it's too scary to be vulnerable in front of him.
Yes.
And yet that's the one thing that she would love to do and to be, is to have an open communicative relationship with a parent, with her father, like everybody.
Wow,
But the main thing I think that changed was, like, I remember Jessie and I in the first season, because I was playing it, once I'd been cast and once we started shooting first season, I was like, oh, well, obviously she wants to take over the company. And I said this to Jessie. I was reading about a scene, and I was like, why is she, I don't remember what scene it was, but it was like, why is she doing this? Because, she wants to take over the company, right? And he was like, I don't think so. And I think, really? Whoa, I totally came at this whole project going in my head going, Shiv obviously wants to be the top, she wants to be the CEO, she wants to be the leader. And now I've been told by the showrunner that that's not part of her character. My God.
Wow.
Well, I have to completely reorder sort of like super objective and objectives and like all of that kind of stuff.
Totally.
But then maybe, I don't know, because he was like, oh, but what do you think? I was like, I think yes. He's like, okay, well, that's interesting. I don't think right now, though. I don't think she, not at all. I'm like, wow, okay. But how fun to kind of, in some ways, like, bury something so deep that you think would be an obvious kind of desire.
Yeah.
That that when it does come out, it's so, like, it even sideblinds the character that she didn't even realize that she wanted it so bad.
Totally.
But it makes so much sense for her to want that.
Totally. Yeah, and maybe her super objective is much more foundational. It's much more involving approval from her father and needing to be loved.
For sure.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the way in which she perceives she could get that.
Right. Ooh, it's a tragedy. It's a sad, sad tale. Because he just keeps not giving his children that approval.
I know, but he can't. Like, I think he's a fascinating sort of character. Where he but he is also giving approval in a lot of ways, but not in the ways that they want. And he wants them to do certain, like, show him love in a different way, but not in the way that they are able to. Or
Yeah, because I wanted to ask too, like, it's kind of a unique show in this way where, like, it's not just an ensemble-y show, it's an ensemble family. And I'm always fascinated by how much of the family dynamics are created by the writing versus the acting. In particular, like, did you look to Brian Cox, his mannerisms or his line deliveries? And do you have conversations with your fellow actors about, sharing characteristics?
No, not specifically, not in ways of like emulating each other in that way. But there's a real sort of magic of casting, I think, in some ways, in that, like, the chemistry between us as actors and as people seems to be quite like a family. And so it is, we do relate in sort of like a beta version of those characters, and not fully, obviously, but there's like a chicken and the egg scenario with that, I think, where the writers are definitely laying the groundwork for the relationships, but then feeding off of what our dynamics are that we bring to the scenes, and then sort of extrapolating, like building on those, like Roman and Shiv, how they get along, and like, that was like a fight scene. It was like in the second episode of the first season, but that suddenly went, oh, okay, that's how they're the physical they're the physical fighters. Like Shiv and Kendall might use their sort of brains to fight, but Roman and Shiv have used like brawn in some way, until like maybe a point in teenagehood where it's you can't fight your sister physically, but they like they regress,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I like that we get those kind of they feel like very real sibling relationships.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, and I got to ask too about the improv, because it's been said that there's a ton of improv on this show. And in some ways you can see that, but in other ways it has to be a highly scripted show. So, I mean, first of all, how different is each take in a typical Succession scene?
It's I think that where the improv line is like, it's about refining what is already on the page. So oftentimes for a scene, we might get alternate lines, and Jesse and the writing team are amazing at coming up with like extra homework, basically, of like, here's the scene, it's 6 pages long, plus we have 9 pages of alternate dialogue. Would you like some? So it's like, do you want any of these lines in the alternates? And you could feed them in. But for the most part, we do, the 6-page original first. And then if something's not working, or we want to try something else, and give, Jesse and the director options in the edit, that's when the improv comes in. And that's where I feel like what the improv gives us is a kind of a flexibility and a life and an ease of like, if you do get your line wrong, it's okay. That's what life is like. You're not talking in full proper sentences all the time that are perfect. You do sort of fumble sometimes, and it's okay to fumble on something or come up with a new line or a new way to say something, if it is in service of giving the character life. So there is improv, but it's like it's built on a really strong writing foundation.
And to be clear, are you memorizing each of those 9 pages of alternative dialogue?
No. But I think I'm worried that like like when we go back to shoot, my muscles will have slackened so much that getting in like 6 pages of dialogue for this scene, and then what usually happens is like, okay, do you want that? So it's like taking out one building block and putting in another, and I really love that mental exercise that like where you learn the scene in this order, but you can't be precious about it because you have to take that line out and put that new one in. And that's just so fun, right? But my muscles will have slackened with this pandemic isolation. And when we go back, I'm like, I don't know how to do an American accent, and I do not know how to memorize lines.
I'm sure that will not be the case. But it does seem like your approach is always about being in the moment, and anything that kind of facilitates that being able to listen to your co-stars.
Yes. And someone like Kieran, for instance, he's a genius. He's like you take away that filter and he just has like perfectly unfiltered, wonderful quips or lines or inventions. Like his imagination is brilliant. And so that, like, it's just, again, it's really easy to be in the moment with him because you never know what he's gonna come out with.
That's so cool. Wow. It's really special. It's like you're saying, it's a magic of casting. Of just there's some sixth element at play when there's really great chemistry between two actors completely in the moment.
Yeah, and it's been great also, like having such wonderful guest cast join us who have, it's shot in New York, and so we have a lot of like New York theater actors come through as either guest cast or then like they become regulars, like J. Smith Cameron.
Yes.
I think from memory, I think it was like only a couple episodes in first season that she was meant to be, and then she's like there all the time because she's brilliant. But then obviously, like, she's known Fisher for years, and then Fisher comes in the second season, and all these, like, wonderful actors who come through. And it kind of, that, I think, suits the nature of what a 0.001% lifestyle is as well. Like, everyone at that level probably does know each other in some way and have, or at least awareness of each other. And there's, like, that baseline of rapport in the New York theatre scene and acting that then is transferred into this bizarre, like billionaire, high net worth sort of world.
Yeah, there's a parallel of the tight-knit community. I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, this is all great. Thank you so much. You're a fountain of wisdom. Can I ask you some quick, very backstagey questions?
Yeah.
We always ask, how did actors get their SAG card?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know how you got your SAG-AFTRA?
Yeah, I as in, like, what job got me my SAG card? Yeah. So I did a horror film called Jezebel in North Carolina in, like, 2012, I think. Yeah. And, like, speaking of accents, that was, like, where I was like,
North Carolinian.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It was, like, meant to be, like, Southern or Louisiana, but we're shooting in North Carolina. I didn't know there was a difference. I should have had someone tell me there was a difference. I was too naive and green and too shy to ask. And I remember at the end of the first week, I was like, I'll just copy the people around me. And so I started doing what it was actually probably more North Carolinian than I realized. And I spoke to the producer. I was like, so is my accent okay? And he was like, well, I don't know. You're Australian and you're doing an American accent. You're doing an accent. I'm like, oh my God. It's so ended up making friends with the sound guy and saying, just give me a little, like, no, do that again if I'm really off.
Oh, wow.
That's why I always get a dialect coach now.
Right. This is why you've become a perfectionist when it comes to accents.
Yeah. And I'm sure I get it wrong, but still, that was more of like oh dear, that's indelible. That's there forever now.
Okay. What about, what is one performance that every actor should see and why?
Oh.
Film, TV, even theater.
Oh, that is a good question. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Do you know what? Actually, I saw Mark Rylance do Farinelli and the King last when that was on in New York, and I was like right up in the gods, like this sort of steep as hell view, basically getting like the top of his nose for most of it. But what an extraordinary performance! That it felt so intimate and yet fluid somehow. Like the sort of the boldness to make those kinds of that kind of a character choice, but then also the cadence was like he had really strange ways of structuring a sentence, even that where the emphasis was put. And I kind of watching it, I'm like, this is amazing. This is a fully different person. I've never seen a soul like this on stage before. This is wonderful. So yeah, that was one that made me go like, oh, acting's amazing. Like actors are amazing. Like we can shapeshift.
Yeah. Even from the top seats in the balcony. Mark Rylance he's the real deal.
Yeah. And it was so intimate.
What is your worst audition horror story?
I don't know. I should say it.
Okay.
I did a self-tape. Yeah, I did a self-tape, and it was one of those ones where you're like, why am I doing this? Oh, okay. Did a self-tape for a thing, and it was running late, and I was meant to have sent it off the night before, but then it was getting late, and so I sort of pre-edited into iMovie, a title card and the audition tape, and I chose that one. That one's fine. Chose that one. Oh, it's fine, I guess. And then, just sort of put the two takes in that I liked of the one scene and scene two, and didn't end up finishing. Didn't review it before I compressed it and sent it, and I hadn't cut out in the second scene. I had a massive actor meltdown and like a real self-hating moment of like, you're terrible, blah blah blah. All right, just do it again. Let's right, we've got that one out of the way. Just like a real hellish like demon version of myself. The worst. I like a real exposing of the bad side of Sarah, who's not a friend of mine. I don't like her.
No.
And I liked the second half of that, obviously, but I put the whole take in and I sent it to everybody. I sent the whole thing off to my US reps, my Australian reps, for them to go and send it on to a casting agent. And only my Australian agent, like 4 hours later, said, a really very gently worded email came back saying, I don't know whether you've edited this in the way that you had intended. And as soon as that happened, like, I knew exactly what I'd done. My stomach just fell to my feet.
Oh my gosh.
And then I was just in panic shock. No. Like, how do I get back a thing that is intangible that's gone into the ether to international waters? What do I do? Oh my God. So oh God, it's just even now
incredible.
I'm going red. I quickly re-edited and sent off, and it's like, something was glitchy with the other one. Just this one's the right one to send, and I have no idea whether the other one went out or if anyone else saw it. And just can hope that only hope that they, like, a time zone thing could have saved me, and maybe they were like, who cares about watching a glitchy one, right? This is the one you're meant to watch. Okay,
right.
So hopefully that worked. But
oh my gosh,
that
I'm
exists.
so sorry I just made you relive that.
What a thing to experience. Oh, God. I'm sure that's not unique, though. I'm sure someone's done that before as well.
I'm sure it's not unique, but I've asked the audition horror story question before, and I've never heard it as a self-tape because, I mean, like you said earlier, it's all in your control, but there are still mistakes to be made, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's less chance, but when they're made, it's pretty bold.
Yes. Wow. Okay, wow. Okay, last question. I would love to know, do you just have a piece of advice for your younger self? If you could go back in time, is there anything that you kind of wish you had known or that early career actors need to know?
Oh, maybe like it's not you. It's like, it's not some sort of fundamental core value or essential part of you that they're saying no to. That they're saying no for you in this character for this moment, with all the many variables that you make up as an actor for this moment, for this character, for this time. You know, there's like financing, and there's maybe the casting director's in a bad mood that day, or maybe like there's so many different variables for the reason you got no. It's not because you're a bad actor or you're a bad person or you aren't very good or you'll never get a job. It's just no for the moment. I think we take every no on to heart, but it doesn't mean that you as an essential person should be compromised by that.
Yeah. Gosh, that was beautiful. Thank you. That was perfect.
Cool. Good.
What a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been nice to chat.
It's been really nice to chat. I feel better prepared to take on this quarantine life based on your advice.
Go get it. You're amazing.
Yeah.
You set this whole thing up internationally in like time zones, and it's Easter. Everyone should be like hanging out with their family and like chilling. But yeah, man.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is great.
Thank you.
In the Envelope is recorded at Lotus Productions and Hyperbolic Audio in New York City, and Soundbox LA, Mark Grouse Studios, and Buzzies in Los Angeles. Thanks as always to our producer extraordinaire, Jamie Muffett, and to the team at Backstage, Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage by using the code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. That's right, 100% free. For more exclusive content, join us on Facebook and Twitter at In the Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who would you like us to interview next? Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another glimpse in the envelope.